Hello and welcome back to the Women's Football Chat. Today we bring you some breaking news courtesy of UEFA. UEFA have announced for the 25-26 season we will be having a UWCL expansion and the Europa League added to the Women's Football talent pyramid, what do you want to call it? Basically, UEFA adding a new competition in the form of the Europa League and expanding the current Women's Champions League. So a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about whether it's a good idea, talk about the advantages, the disadvantages, all that sort of stuff in today's video. Of course, please do share your own thoughts in the comments below. But initial thoughts then, Harry. How did you react when you heard this news?
Well, I think it's pretty big news, isn't it? We're expanding the biggest competition in the women's game. We're adding another one that should accompany that as well. It's giving more opportunities. It's bringing more games, more excitement, more chance to spread the word about women's football to increase revenues and all of that jazz. It's positive.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. With regards to the Women's Champions League expansion first then, now what they're doing is mirroring what they're doing in the men's game. So we move next season in the men's game to a table format, so the Swiss format, I believe they're naming it. So there'll be from 32 teams in the group stage to 36 teams in the table. Same sort of thing happening in the UWCL. We will see move from 16 to 18 teams, so 2 more teams in the Women's Champions League, and then each team in this league phase will play 6 random matches, 3 at home, 3 away, against teams across the group. I don't think they've announced exactly yet whether that will feed into round of 16, but you'll imagine it wouldn't. That would, because if not, there's only 2 teams that don't get to play in the round of 16. So you'd imagine that will still feed to the quarterfinals. So my best guess is the top 4 automatically qualify, and then the next 8-player playoff. That would be my best, presumption, which I guess makes sense. Obviously, we'd love to see the Women's Champions League expand to 36 teams. I believe the men's game is. So see those sort of numbers. There's just not enough good professional clubs yet. I think, given the fact that we've still only got 12 in the WSL professional teams, we need to be starting to get to those bigger leagues. I think that's got to be the next step. With Nuco coming in, obviously, for the Women's Super League, that should be, hopefully, a prerogative over the next sort of 5 years. But I think that's where it's got to grow first. That's my biggest concern with the Europa League, is that are we making it a bit too easy to play in Europe? The fact that even now, a quarter of the WSL clubs will play Champions League football. This would mean that at least, almost half of the WSL clubs would be in Europe, provided they all win their qualifiers and stuff like that. So that does create a weird situation where there's a lot of gains for a lot of teams, but also does it mean that it's impossible for other teams in the league to compete financially? If there's 5 European spots, that pretty much guarantees the same 5 clubs a lot of money every year, a lot more money than any other club. So that's my only concern at the moment. Does it just widen the gap between those teams?
I mean, potentially so. I think we could. That is a problem that can happen. I think the other problem is the quality. Now, I think obviously there's some good sides out there, but you look at the Champions League. There are the teams in the Champions League usually vault their league by an absolute canter. The Barças, Chelsea over the last. Chelsea, they've won it a lot.
Yeah.
Lyon, Bayern, they usually win the league by Bayern/Wolfsburg. But they usually win the league by a massive margin.
Yeah.
And they are front runners for the UWCL. Now, the teams who are going to be in the Europa League aren't going to be ones that are second behind that top team. They're going to be ones who are third and fourth and fifth. And there's a reason they are so far off the team who win the league.
Yeah, but does this go some way to bridge that gap? If they do end up getting a bit more money from Europa League, does that mean that someone could fight Barcelona? Does that mean that Man United might have the money to fight with Chelsea and stuff like that? Could that actually bring the teams a little bit closer together in the top portion of the table? I think the problem is it will divide the bottom clubs and the top clubs. There's already a huge divide, given the fact that the team that gets relegated from the WSL often has to become a semi-professional or amateur team in order to handle the costs that are associated with losing that professional status and obviously the television money that comes with the WSL. So that's a big issue at the moment in the women's game, that teams that get relegated suddenly lose their professional status. I think therefore that's a more pressing issue, a more pressing matter than having more European competition. But in terms of being able to grow leagues and generate more money from the women's game, I think a Europa League makes a lot of sense, given the fact that Manchester United, Manchester City, Arsenal, Liverpool, Tottenham, all without Europe this season. Aston Villa as well, probably they would have been one of the teams qualifying for a potential Europa League. So there's a lot of teams there that would now have European football.
Yeah.
Not so much Liverpool and Tottenham, but they're in the conversation for the next few seasons if they can keep competitive. And then teams like Wolfsburg, Atleti, I think there is enough quality there to have another division. But my question is, why wouldn't we just expand the Women's Champions League? Why couldn't we just have a bigger Champions League? I get that, obviously, the leagues aren't big enough at the moment to sort of handle that. The fact that would mean half of the WSL teams are in the Champions League, stuff like that. But I feel like that would have been a more sensible suggestion rather than having a second tier of European football. But I guess having more finals, having more games is possibly better. I don't know.
I think that this expansion is good, but this is the limit to it. We cannot expand Europe any further without the expansion of all the domestic leagues and without the improvement of all the domestic leagues, because this is as far as it goes. They can't. If they say they're going to try a Conference League in 2028, they're on a mare unless they've massively expanded the domestic campaigns.
I think professionalisation across more divisions in domestic football is pivotal, and also the increasing the number of teams in a league. I think at the moment having 12-team leagues just isn't enough. I get what people say about the number of games, but I don't think for me having Europa League, because it doesn't add any more to the Champions League, is fine, because that's just giving more games to a different set of players. I think for me, if you want to cut games out, first, I don't think the women's game is really at a point yet where it's too pressing. I know there's been a lot of injuries, but I think that's only natural as we start to progress to more matches.
Yeah.
And I think we need to learn more and more about how to protect female players from injuries, because obviously we're seeing a lot of ACL injuries, and a lot of it is down to the fact that boots aren't specific for female players. So that is that's the bigger issue with injuries rather than congestion for me. I don't think it's because they're playing too many matches. I think it's that we don't know how to properly deal with female players.
Yeah, and I mean that's the bottom line of all expansion in the women's game. It has to come from investment. We have to invest in the proper female sportswear.
Yeah.
We have to, and those clubs that have to drop to semi-pro and they get relegated, they wouldn't have to do that if there was the investment. Yeah. And then obviously with the more investment, that means more teams stay professional. And then WSL probably turn around and go, okay, let's put 20 professional teams in there because we've got enough now.
Yeah.
Whereas at the moment, we do only have 12 professional teams in England.
That would be the issue. If the WSL was to say, right, we're going to have 20 teams, 8 teams in the Championship can come up next season, the quality would be so diluted. Because teams like Birmingham, teams like Southampton, who are currently watching the Championship, they're good for that level. But compare them to a Chelsea and they just cannot compete. There is no way they're competing.
Could you do it gradually?
Potentially, you don't do relegation from the WSL, but then where's the jeopardy? What's stopping? Where is the what would you call it? Motivation for teams in the WSL.
Promote 2, relegate 1. But obviously, then that follows down the whole pyramid because then everyone has to do that. If not, the Championship will run out of teams, and then the third division will run out of teams, and then.
Also, you'd end up with a weird situation where you've got 13 teams, then 15 teams, then on to 17 teams.
It's going to take a lot of planning.
Yeah, it's going to have to be someone smarter than us who can understand the women's game on a deeper level and knows a lot about the financial side of it. But I think from outlookers or onlookers looking into the game at the moment, the women's game, it needs more investment, obviously, from both clubs and from the top level. And that's what frustrates me is the money is there to invest in the women's game. It's just that there isn't an incentive to do that yet.
Yeah, no, I think this is the thing. We've got investment here with this Women's Europa League coming. The problem is, though, is this the right investment? Again, I'm sure someone more higher up and professional has looked at it and thought it's a good idea, but really, could it be a failure? Could it actually not work?
The thing is, it's motivated UEFA. It's motivated for UEFA by money. The fact that they will sell more television rights is such a positive for them. Yeah. But that's the thing. Money's got to come from more. The way that we get more money into the women's game is by getting more people watching it. Which means that more television rights money comes in, more sponsorship money comes in, and that trickles into the women's game. But the problem is, obviously, at the moment, it's just about pushing the game out as much as possible, which I think is exactly why it's so important that it gets pushed out on all platforms and stuff. You see the amount of people complaining, especially under like a Sky Sports post, if they post about the women's game.
30-year-old day.
Exactly. You'll get all these complaints about, well, why do we need this? We don't want this. We don't want this. But actually, it's so vital for the women's game to be pushed out by those big broadcasters and try and attract those crowds. And that's going to be the most important thing. But bring us back to the subject matter then. And overall, is the Europa League a good idea? What were your thoughts? What are your final sort of thoughts?
I think in terms for the teams that will get to compete in it, for the match day fans, for the people that are going to go, another European competition, another chance for silverware. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Whether in the long run it's going to be a good idea for growing the women's game and increasing all of the things we've just talked about and making having a positive effect on the development of women's football. It's going to be interesting to see. That's the bit I'm a little bit on the fence about.
For me, there's not really a downside to the Europa League. It is only positive. It's going to give more clubs more money, especially given if you think of the teams that are going to qualify for the Europa League, they're going to be champions in lower tier competitions across Europe. So that can only be positive. The fact that, I mean, I'm not sure who the champion of the Estonian Women's League is, if they have one, but they may be able to play European competition, which would be exponential for the amount of money they would receive, and that would trickle through the league. So that could have a big impact. I think it's going to have a bigger impact on nations that aren't in Europe yet, rather than nations that are. But I think it's positive for fans. We get more football. I think it's positive for players. They get another stage to present themselves on. And it's positive for the clubs involved, obviously, because teams like Manchester United without Europe this year, that's not great. But now they have a chance at a trophy in a competition which would be winnable for them. Yeah. And it would mean that teams like, if you don't qualify for the Champions League, there is still something there. It's not just, well, that's it then. You've got just the title in your domestic league to focus on, which at the moment, there is quite a monopoly over those titles. Barca seem quite consistent with winning the Liga F, Chelsea with the WSL, and Bayern or Wolfsburg. There is a bit of competition there for the Frauen Bundesliga. Same with Ligue 1. You've got PSG and Lyon. Really, Lyon are the strong horse there, the powerhouse. So there are already a bit of that happening where one team dominates. So to have a second tier competition in Europe gives a chance for someone else to win a trophy.
Yeah, and I think people will look at it when those Estonian champions turn up and lose 8-0 to Manchester United and go, well, what's the point? But if you think about it, that happens in the men's games. Yeah. Teams from...
but the money for the Estonian team will be fantastic for them.
Teams from... it happens all the time.
I don't know why that's the example, by the way.
Yeah. I really hope... We're going to have to go find out who they are after this.
If there is one.
There might not even be one. But those smaller European nations, their champions come over to the Champions League. They go, we're at the Bernabeu away next week. They'll lose 7-0. But the money they've got off that, they'll be laughing.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, it's a really positive thing for the women's game to have a second tier competition. I think eventually, maybe 10 years in the future, we're looking at a conference league. I hope they don't introduce that too quickly, because if not, you are just going to dilute European competition so much. There needs to be more expansion in domestic leagues and professionalisation of domestic leagues before we can look at expanding beyond this point. This is a nice step, a nice bit of progress. Let's not overdo it now. Let's keep it where we are. For me, as I say, the next step is the domestic leagues, but that's not going to be on UEFA. No. UEFA, though, will need to... UEFA's prerogative here is to increase television rights, so more money goes into those teams who can then spend that money making the leagues better, which they'll do by buying players from lower down the league, and then, we start to see teams getting more money and professionalisation. But also, as more money comes into women's game, for example, if there is a bigger prize money for the WSL, which there could be under NUCO, because it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. Obviously, they're splitting off from the FA now, so there's huge opportunities, similar to when the Premier League did it. Huge opportunities now for sponsorship and for broadcasting rights. So that could be big. So that comes in next season. So that 24-25. So that's going to be huge. But it's going to take stuff like that, bringing more money into the women's game, which will encourage owners to want to invest. Because that's the thing for me. I've always been really confused as to why, if you have a team that's in League One and they're not going anywhere, why not invest in your women's team? Why not put that money that could go towards buying one striker for your men's team into buying one of the best women's teams in the world? But
that's the thing. Like, we're looking at a GU team in #United Women. They're what, 4 steps away from the
I think they're third tier, aren't they?
Yeah,
they're one off the WSL Championship, and they're not. I'm not sure they're getting on this season, but I don't think they've been doing too badly.
But that's all they've done is invest.
Yeah,
and they've invested, and look where they are now.
Because they realise that as the women's game grows and will continue to grow, having their team already up there is going to be so positive for them, because they will earn money through that. I expect that when NUCO come in, we're going to get television rights, which for fans is a negative. Obviously, we're paying for it, but it's such a positive in the fact that money will be going in order to fund the clubs. So, and as someone who already pays for all the television to watch the men's football, it's not too much of a difference as long as they don't hike the prices up as a consequence. But or decide to sell to like DAZN, and then we have to buy something else. But you get the picture. It's going to be interesting to see how that all develops. But overall, UEFA Women's Europa League is a positive. The UWCL expansion also a positive. 2 more clubs in there. If you take the two best clubs that didn't qualify this year, let's say Wolfsburg and Manchester United, or Wolfsburg and Manchester City, that's only a positive for the Champions League to have 2 more clubs of quality in there. But I'm saying they could be the 2 clubs in the Champions League.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's the thing. 2 clubs in the
Champions League final. You never know.
I'm not exactly sure whether the Europa League is following that same format. I don't think they've announced anything about that yet. You would imagine it would. It would be odd if they stuck with the group stage format. But yeah, either way, it's no more games apart from the playoff, which it's 2 more matches. It's not that big. It's going to be further expansion and hopefully lead to more money pumped into the women's game. So overall, really positive stuff. I'm very happy with the Women's Europa League coming. But yeah, you guys give your comments down below. I'm sure there's going to be some not discerning views, but some opposing views, some opposing arguments made. Love to hear them because, sometimes you can be a bit narrow-minded if you think from one perspective. So please do enlighten us if you disagree with this initiative. But that is everything from us today. Thank you guys very, very much for watching. Last night, we streamed England-Scotland, so thanks to everyone that tuned into that. This Sunday, big stream coming up. Chelsea versus Arsenal in the WSL. Huge title fight clash. Chelsea could go 6 points clear. They could also be level with Arsenal, I believe. Yeah. So lots to play for, a lot at stake. Join us there from quarter past 12.
Yep.
I believe it is. I hope I've not got my timings wrong there. But either way, join us for that. That is everything from us today, though. Thank you guys very, very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.